since we are family, family comes first. So I have to say thank you for coming tonight, to our first medical workshop, which was sponsored by Moss Park Pharmacy tonight. And we are very fortunate to have Dr. Alan Lee as a presenter tonight. So I tried to remember Alan's bio as much as I can, so I apologize, Alex, if I miss anything. Dr. Alan Lee is a physician at the Regent Park Community Health Center, which serves a diverse, racialized and marginalized community, such as immigrant, refugee, LGBT, and people living with HIV and AIDS. Alan is also a founder president of Asian Community AIDS Services, which is ACAS, the family you belong to. And he's also a founding chair for the predecessor of Gay Asians AIDS Project, which stands for GAAP. In 1987, Alan is so brave that he established a 10% club in Hong Kong, which is the first gay club organization registered by the government of Hong Kong. In 1992 to 2000, he is working part-time at Casey House, acute hospital for people living with HIV and AIDS. And he became a medical director at Casey House in 1998 to 2000. In 2001, he also co-founded an organization called Committee for Accessible AIDS Treatment, CAAT, which is a coalition with all health and community service providers to improve the treatment access for people who have no medical coverage. Over time, Alan also became very innovative and doing some community-based research for CAAT, and it led to develop some capacity skill training, such as the one that I'm going to attend tomorrow. It's called the ETSN, ethno-racial treatment network support. Support network. The Legacy for PHA mentoring project, as well as the HIV and immigration service access training. And his beloved one, Mr. Keith Wong, is with Alan. They've been married for how many years?
Well, we were just married for 2 years.
But been together for 28 years. Wow, that's a long time. And Keith is a long-time activist, as well as he was the former executive director for Asian Community AIDS Services. Did I miss it?
Wow, your memory is very good. Either you know me very well by heart, or your memory is really good. So thank you.
Thank you. Well, let's welcome Alan to the floor. And enjoy the presentation. It's going to be an interactive one, as I was told.
Oh, thank you. Thanks, Kenneth.
You're welcome.
So, 恭喜發財，新年快樂 Happy New Year, everyone. So this is the second day of the Chinese or Lunar New Year. So usually that's when families sit together and start the new year dinner. So I think that's another good symbol for how we relate to each other. So I'm very happy to be spending the evening with one of my chosen families, ACAS, and I'm really feeling privileged that you invited me to share with you some of the histories and the journeys that I was privileged to be part of. So, but since it's New Year, I thought that we should have some fun, and we also want to get to know you a little better. So if you don't mind, since you heard so much about me, I would appreciate it if you can maybe go around and just tell me your name and how you connected to ACAS or how long you've known ACAS. Is that okay? So, but since it's New Year, the other thing we usually do is we want to have fun and we have some prizes, so we have some competition. So we have some questions about ACAS related history. So if you get it right, you're gonna get a prize. Okay, and you can share with your table. Some prizes are shareable, some are selfish and not shareable, but you can find innovative ways to share it. So before ACAS, there was something called GIPA, as Kenneth mentioned to you. It's called the Gay Asian AIDS Project. And then before Gay Asian AIDS Project, there is something called the Gay Asians Toronto, which is GAT. So now, so the first question, when was gay? Okay, so I need a co-host first of all, because I don't want to arbitrate. So whoever knows the answer, you raise it, and then, if we choose you to answer, then you get one chance to answer. If you answer it correctly, then you win. If you answer wrong, then the second person can attempt, right? So by the fourth person, we'll obviously get it right. So who else might be my co-host? Andrew?
Andrew.
Andrew. And so now you decide who you pick, right? Because you know everybody, then you can call them out by name.
1981.
Oh, not when ACAS was
So now, many people get it wrong. Many people quoted me as founding chair of Gay Asians Toronto, which is actually not true. I wasn't even a founding member. So actually our previous president of ACAS was wrong in his 20th anniversary speech. There's 4 people who came together in 1981 to form Gay Asians Toronto. They were Richard Fung, Nito Marcus, Tony Souza, and Gerald Chen. And there's 2 events that prompted that to happen. One was the year before, in 1980, there was a gay conference in, I think, Washington. And that was the first time that queer Asians were able to connect with each other across Canada and the US. And Richard Fung was there. Richard Fung, as some of you, probably all of you know, is a very famous Canadian video artist. And he was part of the conference, and he met a lot of other gay Asians for the very first time, and they had a caucus meetings. They talked about how important it is to connect. People were feeling really isolated and they didn't have a voice in the community. So when each of them went home, they decided to try to organize locally to form communities. So as a result of that, there were a group that started in Boston, in Toronto, in San Francisco, and in LA within the next couple of years. So Gay Asians Toronto was formed in 1981. And I actually came to Toronto in 1981 to start my med school at the end of summer. So obviously I couldn't have started the group, but I was very proud to be part of that history. And actually, 1981 was another important year in the history of Toronto's community. Do you know what that is?
About the bathhouse? About the bathhouse?
So the bath raid happened in 1981. When I came to Toronto in the summer, and there was an event at the 519 Church Community Center called Chopsticks. And it is an event put together by the Gay Asians Toronto to raise money for the Right to Privacy Committee, which is a coalition that was formed by the lesbian and gay community to defend the people who were arrested in the bath raids and to fight for and to challenge the government, the police for those charges. So it was that was the first time I connected with gay Asians, and there was a show that people were dancing, were giving speeches, were reciting poetry, and that was the first time I saw a lot of communities. Before then, I was studying in Winnipeg, which is colder than here, and there was like 4 gay Asians all together, and we see each other all at various events, and some of us are friends, some are not. But it's really very small and isolated community. So it was a really eye-opener for me to see like a whole room full of Asians who are actually not only supporting themselves, but actually doing bigger and better things to support, the community. So the second question, when was Gay Asian AIDS project? So the story about the Gay Asian AIDS project was actually, as Kenneth mentioned, I graduated from med school in 1986, and I went back to Hong Kong for a year. And that's when I worked with some other people to form the first gay group that I registered in Hong Kong. So when I came back though, a lot of my friends started to get sick. And actually I think before I left Toronto, some of the friends already started to get sick. And basically we didn't really know what to do about supporting them. And actually before that, in 1983, Gay Asians actually organized another show called Celebration. And we had a slideshow called The Visible Invisibles, where we interview like 10 Gay Asians and talk about their stories. And we also have a very famous drag group there called Oriental Express, who was very popular. For those of you who've been around long enough would know. And so every weekend, in one of the downtown bars, there's a huge gathering, and they were really popular. And so we put together a show, and that's before the AIDS Community Toronto was formed. But we knew that it was an emerging crisis. We're seeing people who were getting sick. So actually, in 1983, the first celebration, we raised money to donate to the pre-AIDS Committee of Toronto, which was operating, I think, on top of the Kentucky Fried Chicken thing on Church Street. So that was why some of those other years are important. Now, so in 1988, we decided to apply for funding to do our own project. But before then, actually, there was some issue. So when I first came back, so we were trying to organize and figure out how to support our friends and community, right? But so there was actually, I think not only for Gay Asians, but for a lot of the LGBT community, it was a new thing. Because before then, most of us were doing just volunteer work. All of the programs were volunteer run. Like numerous groups have support groups, have social groups that meets at the 519, but almost none of us has public funding to run any programs. So all of us are just doing volunteer stuff. So we have discussion groups, we have parties, we have field trips, we have some joint events with other groups. We have educational workshops, all the different stuff. But so when it came to a crisis situation, like the early days of the AIDS epidemic, the government started to give out funding for programming, right? So a lot of our communities were not experienced or ready to apply for them and don't know what to do with them. And we don't have organizational status, like we're not registered non-profit organizations, we're just volunteer groups. So at first we were trying to just work with whatever group that is doing the work. So ACT, I remember the AIDS Community Toronto called me and tried to refer us to buddy up with someone who was an Asian worker who speaks very little English, who already suffered from pneumonia but doesn't know how to talk to his doctor about getting treatment. Those days we were advocating very hard to get aerosolized pentamidine to prevent the pneumonia that was very fatal for people with AIDS. But it's not widely available, and the person that I was a buddy with was very shy and feel very stigmatized, so he never goes to his doctor and talk about and ask for those things, even though we gave him all the information. But that was referred from the AIDS Committee of Toronto. And then we find that the St. Stephen's Community Center got in money for doing AIDS education in Chinatown, because they have ESL classes, they have a lot of groups. So during the Gay Asians Toronto work, I got to know Olivia Chow and Jack Layton. All of you know Olivia? Yeah. So she was a school board trustee at that time, actually. So because I interviewed her for the Gay Asians Toronto newsletter a few years ago. So when I graduated as a physician, she knows that there is this project happening in Chinatown, so she wants me to sit on the advisory group to help make this project, relevant to our community. So I remember myself, Olivia, another person from the AIDS Committee of Toronto at Jackson, who was the education program director at that time, and a couple other people sit around. But basically, the project doesn't have any interest to address gay Asians or people living with HIV. They just want to tell people what is safer sex, how to put on a condom. That's it. They don't want to even talk about emotional or social issues that affect people's ability to put on a condom. So they have money to do a slideshow. There's like 20-some years ago, right? So there's no Facebook, there's no internet. So you're talking about slideshow, like pictures that you have to flash through that wheel. So I remember one Sunday, we were trying so hard at meetings to convince them to do something that is like more personal, more like a story that tells people's lives, that relates to sexual orientation and health. So Olivia and I actually spent the weekend trying to script the whole thing out for them. And then it was rejected because they feel that, wow, our community is not ready to deal with these things. We're not funded to do these things, So after working with them for almost a whole year, we decided we need to really do our own work because we cannot count on existing institutions within the ethno-racial community to support our own people. So that's why Gay Asian AIDS Project is actually the only AIDS services that have gay in its name, because we have to prove to the funder that we are serving a unique need that is not being addressed by the projects they already funded. So that was very political at that time. It obviously, raised some red flags in people because some people is not comfortable. They say it's too exclusive. It's, what about non-gay people? And then people might feel stigmatized coming to the project and so on and so forth. But we decided, that was really important. So when we get a little bit of funding, we get like a 1.5 day staff to do outreach and education. There's no money for support whatsoever. Even though our initial intention really is to focus on support. But we were able to hire someone. We had a desk at the AIDS Committee of Toronto for the first year. We had a phone line, and we organizing workshops with different people, mostly at various members' homes. I don't know if any of you were at one of those workshops. Some of the people actually are still with ACAS, who were at the very first workshop. So who was the first staff of GAP? So Lee Ming actually is an Asian lesbian who used to go by Barbara Lee, but she was the first worker at Gay Asian AIDS Project for the first 1.5 years. Patrick actually was the second worker of Gay Asian AIDS Project. And myself and Joe Olizier are both board members and non-staff. I guess the other thing that I really wanted to pay tribute to is in the early days it's really, if you think that HIV is stigmatized now, 20 years ago it's a lot worse, right? So, and then part of the challenge is that if we don't have visibility, you cannot claim leadership or do a lot of effective work. I remember one of the most political things that the AIDS Committee Toronto Executive Director did at that time was really to call for the gay community to take ownership and claim HIV as our issue, right? So that was Stephen Manning in I think around 1986 to 7, but it was not a proud thing to claim, to own, right? So it was very difficult, and also it's very hard to do that as an Asian issue because every Asian who has HIV felt that they were alone. So when you're alone, you don't want to, put yourself to more harm or stigma. But soon after, I think even like right after me, I think the second president of ACAS, right? Is it the second president? Yeah, it's an open PHA. So who was that? So Lawrence actually was, because ACAS was formed in, I don't know if that's a question.
94.
So that's not a question, so that's fine. So 1994 was ACAS formation, not Gay Asian in Toronto, right? So Lawrence joined us shortly after that, and he was actually was fighting a lot of health issues and also a lot of access barriers. So ACAS was able to work with him to overcome some of those challenges, and he was very proud, and he was very active in ACAS, and became the first open PHA president. And he actually was also a public speaker in the Vancouver ACE conference when we had an Asian ACE conference workshop. So Dr. Kirby Sue actually was one of the founders of Gay Asian ACE project, and but he passed away actually just when ACAS was formed. So he was very instrumental in creating a safe space for PHAs, and he was a psychiatrist by trade, but he relates to the community more as a peer, and he's an artist, and actually this year would mark his 20th year of passing. His partner, Ho Tam, is an artist who's living in Vancouver now, and he's actually interested, he's talked to Nanook about organizing a memorial event for Kirby this summer. So I hope that some of you can attend that. Actually, one of the very first publications that I have internationally is in a porn magazine, so I thought you might be interested to know. So, in 1992, our story appeared in this magazine that is now extinct, right? It's called OG, Oriental Guys. It's a kind of a pornographic magazine, or sex magazine. Anyway, so, but we had an article about the need for gay Asians to come together to form community, and there's a picture of our very first office, which has now been turned into one of the many condos at the corner of St. Joseph and right? So there was an article that I wrote about the first gay Asian with HIV that I worked with. That was a very emotional experience for me. There's also an article by Kirby, who used his Chinese name to write the article. So you can, after the talk, you can peruse through, not just the pictures, but So actually, a lot of you might know Nito from his day as staff at PWA, but before that, he was actually one of the founding members of Gay Asians Toronto. He was a huge star in all of our celebration shows. His Betty Davis impersonation was, historic and very impressive. And Patrick, most of you know, is very dear to us, and who's been actually, when he was just finished high school or university, he was one of the earliest staff at ACAS. And then he left, and then he came back for many, many years, and his legacy lives on.
And so also Nito was the president of ACAS after Lawrence.
Yeah. So we set a very so that was actually actually all of these people are very important, because Patrick was very open about his status, and I think many people who have received Patrick's support really describe that as life-changing experience, and the way that he just carries his life and so open and so proud, I think it's really, really transformative for a lot of people. Now, Kirby was very instrumental in ensuring that the interests of PHAs do not get lost when we change from GAP to ACAS. So actually so I'll bridge that with the next question, because when ACAS was formed, there's 3 groups that came together. So which of these groups wasn't part of the original founding members of ACAS? So the Gay Asian ACE project, now don't pick A now, that means you haven't been listening all evening. So that's a giveaway, so you only have 1 in 3 chances of getting it wrong. So Vietnamese ACE project, Toronto Chinese Health Education Committee's ACE, St. Stephen's ACE Outreach Project. So obviously, one of the reasons they didn't want to join forces was that they have a Chinese and a Portuguese program together. So they are a huge agency, so they don't see the need to join ACAS. So at those times, it was really difficult to, even though we did all the work, I actually have chaired all of those projects at some point during those days. Some of the people actually worked together. We are the only one who did support work. We're the one who actually have the most funding. But we have the least visibility and clout in the overall banner of HIV leadership in the Asian community because we are marginalized, because we are supposed to be only gay. So over time, I think, and then the other two projects are getting smaller and smaller. Thank you. And it also feels that they don't have the same amount of passion and connectedness to the issue, right? So we felt that we really should take on the issue full-fledged and really claim the issue and create a bigger banner so that the people who may not totally fit within gay Asian HIV might be able to benefit from the services as well. So that was a very, initially we thought it was a very straightforward thing, you know, who doesn't want a bigger banner, coordinated services, you know, everybody working together, but that's not so simple, right? Even now, I think there's a lot of division between the straight Asian community and the gay, queer Asian community. So again, like imagine 20 years ago, a lot of people in our community has never worked with any groups in Chinatown or, you know, Filipino community or the Vietnamese community, you know. So there was a lot of fear, right? You know, we have created this important and safe space for Asians with HIV, and it's a very gay positive space, and you know, we have very important core values, but we didn't see that. And we came into being precisely because some of the other people in our communities doesn't share those values. So when we came together, you know, we might originally had the more expertise and more funding, but they had the big institutions. They have the big community leaders who controls the media. They have the religious groups. They have all that stuff. So people were really, really fearful of losing that safe space we have. And Kirby was very strong as an advocate to make sure that we write into our bylaws specific mechanisms that safeguard the interest of our support program and safeguard the interest of PHAs. So that's also why ACAS was the only A-service organization that has kind of like a veto provision that a PHA rep on the board can veto certain decisions about the support program. So that means that even if like, you know, Chinatown comes and stack our whole board, you know, we would have a voice that can safeguard those interests. That may not be the same reality now, 20 years later, but at that particular point in history, that was pivotal to our community agreeing to come together as ACAS, right? So we actually spent a whole year and very heated debate, very emotional, passionate, arguing, discussing, listening, and trying to figure out how to create, you know, like that space that are both helpful for our services to expand, for our leadership to expand, but also not to lose sight of the important history and the spaces we created. So now the Vietnamese AIDS Project and the Toronto Chinese Health Education Committee still exist, but they don't really work on HIV issues anymore. The Vietnamese AIDS Project's kind of disappeared into ACAS core work, and the Gay Asian AIDS Project obviously is part of ACAS core work. The first thing that happened was actually one of the founders, Gerald Chen. So I talked about like Richard Fung going to the conference, so coming back. At the same time, actually, I forgot to mention was Gerald Chen is a Chinese Canadian, wrote an article about being gay in the Asian community in a magazine called Asian Asian. It's a mainstream Asian Canadian magazine. So that was actually the very first time that a queer Asian voice was appear in the mainstream Asian media. So that connects him with Richard. So Richard found Gerald, and then they connect with Nito and Tony Souza was working in the school board, and he's a sexual health educator. And so the four of them connected, and they started to call meetings at the 519. So that's how it happened. And then in 1981, we talked about the chopsticks, and that's my initiation to Gay Asians Toronto. And in 1982, actually, I had the privilege and the pleasure to lead the Pride Parade in Chinatown, because at that particular time, Pride is very small. So like, you know, since Kenneth kind of gave away my age already, so I may as well, right? So in 1982, I was a student, just moved here, and Richard actually was away, making some movie or something somewhere. But anyway, so Pride was, I think that was the second time they have a Pride celebration. And they booked the Grange Park. Anybody know what Grange Park is? So that's the part between the AGO, behind the AGO, right? That's the area behind the AGO. There's a little park behind the AGO. So very close to Chinatown, right? And that's where people have their Pride celebration. And the City Hall received a lot of protests from the Chinese community to deny that permit, because they said there's no gay people in Chinatown, and they're gonna get offended. So the organizer, the Pride Committee, come to Gay Asians Toronto and want us to have a speaker, and want us to lead the parade in Chinatown, because to kind of negate that myth, right? So because some of the leadership of Gay Asians Toronto was away, and we had to give an answer very quickly, so I kind of decided to just take on that. And so that was actually a very life-changing experience for me, because I was a student, I was not really that out, but I felt that it was a historic opportunity. It's really important. You know, how many times would a mainstream gay community put a Gay Asians front and center in a big celebration, even though it's nothing compared to what we have now. So we actually, I think, have like 20-some Gay Asians marching through Chinatown. That was really historic. Now compared to the ACAS contingent, it's very, you know, that's probably nothing. But if you imagine 25 years ago, or 30 years ago, that's huge, right? Some of the issues we grapple with is still the same kind of issues, but, you know, just the world is even a worse place before when we started. So the story that I wrote in OG, and also actually part of that in our 15th or 10th anniversary book of ACAS, actually talked about the same person that I first supported as part of Gay Asian Aid project. And to me, it really highlighted a lot of the stigma, shame, the lack of support, but also the community mobilization potential that comes with that. Because I remember the first person that we were called in to support was somebody who actually lives in College Park apartment, who is very well educated, speaks perfect English actually, who has a professional job, but he totally denied being gay. He totally denied the fact that he has HIV. So when he got into hospital for AIDS complication, he refuses to seek services from ACT. He refuses to seek services from Chinatown. And then his health just spiraled down, and he was like found basically unconscious in his apartment by the public health nurse. And even when we visited him in the hospital, the first thing is like, it's almost like family. You know that somebody is part of your group, that you just like nod and you connect, and he doesn't feel that, you know, he would never came out to the hospital social worker, you know, who is a very motherly figure, who's a very nice person, you know, but I think, you know, the long-standing sense that he's been feeling oppressed, that he didn't want to come out. But when we first visited him in the hospital, the moment, you know, I said, oh, I know you from somewhere. Actually, I didn't know him from bars or anything before. But over time, but he was already very ill. So, and we didn't have any experience. So the most amazing thing was, it's really dramatic. Within a very short time, we were able to call hairdressers, bankers, airline flight attendants, lawyers, psychiatrists, other health providers, you know, all the different people that were needed to help support his need, because his need was really to go home to be with his family before he died. but the hospital thinks he's too weak, and they won't let him travel. And he doesn't know how to move his funds from the bank. He doesn't know how to get ready for the travel. He needs a companion to go with him. And actually a very nice hospital worker who's a straight woman actually volunteered her time to fly with him back to Hong Kong and back the next day. That was one of the most moving things that I have been part of. So, and then he was really touched by the fact that, we kind of rally all around him, and we never even know him before. He's not like a volunteer for gay Asians or anything, And so I think that's where, we build that sense of community and build that sense of family. And I think through that experience, not only the person feels supported, I think all of the people who were involved in the care really see the meaning and the importance of our work. And that's how I think in the early days we built that momentum of Gay Asian AIDS Project and ACAS. Even though we have very little money, all of these people are not staff, and the staff we have are not supposed to do support. We're supposed to do education, right? But I think we did something that was really life-changing and it was really meaningful for the person. And actually, we were able also to connect him with some people in Hong Kong when he got to Hong Kong, because one of our Gay Asian Toronto member has moved back to Hong Kong. And so we've actually also mobilized people to receive him in Hong Kong so that he got support. So those are really, quite amazing. One of the things that we did early too was, again, using different community building strategies, like our celebration show. So shortly after that, like in 1995, there is this big show that, we have probably like 60 people in the cast that put together this show to fundraise for ACAS at the very early 1995. And that's 15th anniversary of Gay Asians Toronto. And also in the early days, Richard Fong made a video called The Fighting Chance, which kind of dispels some of the invisibility and the myth that there's no gay Asians living with HIV. Because in the early workshops that we had in our homes and stuff, some people would come and talk as if like there's no people with HIV amongst us, but we know very well that some of the people in the workshop actually are HIV positive and are feeling really quite hurt by their peers, and it kind of creates an even more unsafe environment for people not to disclose, right? Because if your friends sitting around all assume everybody is negative, then it makes it harder for the people who are positive to come out. So Richard was also part of the very early group of people who make this happen, and so he decided to dedicate his work, best, which is making videos, and did a fighting chance. And I don't know if it's in this clip, but I look dreadfully young, and Lee Ming actually appears in it too, if you see that. Also learn to incorporate and become a non-profit organization, because even though ACT was quite supportive, it's really not very helpful to be always under somebody's wing and just have a little desk and your own sense of identity. You don't really get to build your community space and all that. So after the first year and a half, they actually also understand and support us. So we got incorporated, Gay Asian Toronto got incorporated, and we applied for funding on our own. And then we moved into our own office on St. Joseph Street a couple years after that. Talk about why form ACAS, right? So I think the issues of ownership and leadership is important, and also to really build that resources needed. So again, I think I talked about that when I talked about Kirby. So a lot of the discussion and the early bylaws, the founding bylaws of ACAS really focus on guaranteeing that we have a gay positive, sex positive, PHA positive, and GIPA PHA leadership space. So like we talk about disclosure challenges, do we have to force everybody to come out in order to be on the board and all that? So we were very flexible. We understand the reality people are living with, but we, privately and we within the organization itself knows, because the support program is very connected to people and the trust were built amongst people. So it really worked out, I think, very well. At this point, I think we want to recap the first 10 years. It's a few minutes long, and you got to see a lot of us in a nicer, younger way. That's in the middle. Okay, sure. So that was shown in the 10th anniversary. So this is Joe Olivier. That's Dr. Kirby Sue on the other side. So these are all our early pioneers, HA leaders. And we have an award show in 1990 to honor some of them. This is Lloyd Wong and Tony Chong before that. This is Richard Fong. This is Patrick. This is William Lau. William Lau was one of the early executive directors. You can explain further.
Okay, this is the Pride Parade Patients Toronto and ACAS. This is Carmen. Oh, this is Juan and other people. Doing the coalition against homophobia. This is Ito, my case. It was 92, this one. This is Dr. Stephen Wu. So, yeah. This is in 1983.
No. That's a big HIV and Chinese medicine workshop in 1983.
Chúc mừng kỷ niệm 10 tuổi của dịch vụ AIDS cho cộng đồng Á Châu.
10週年生日快樂
Maligayang ikasampung anibersaryo sa ACAS.
สุขสันต์วันครบรอบ10 ปีของ ACAS ค่ะ
10周年生日快乐
안녕하십니까. ACAS 10주년을 진심으로 축하드립니다.
ACAS 10周年おめでとうございます
아주 기념일로서 ACAS
Happy 10th anniversary ACAS.
So you saw the first 10 years. So I want maybe like, if you can share some of the highlights for you that you know from ACAS in the last 10 years. I guess in summary, really, I think my, in sharing this, I think when I look back at ACAS history, the thing is, I think we actually grew a lot through the struggles against oppression and through addressing a lot of crises. That actually often provide that opportunity to help us understand as well as the true meaning of our work and the communities. And I think that it's also really heartwarming to realize that our communities are actually care, and people actually can be mobilized to work together, and it is a great thing when that happens. I think in a lot of the struggles that we went through, we did rely a lot on our partners to build coalitions. One of the things that you probably didn't see a lot, but when Keith and I looked a lot younger in a press conference, that's when we had a whole campaign against homophobia. In the Chinese tabloid printed an article at Pride that says, does people afflicted with homosexuality deserve to have pride? And then one Asian parents actually brought that to ACAS office and said, you guys better do something about it. So we mobilized the communities. We get them to formally print an apology on the front page of their tabloid. And we got all the community leaders to rally around and make public statements about that this is not acceptable, this is wrong. And they actually gave us a police shoes to print outside of the school. So that was a huge landmark thing for the Asian community, the Asian community aid services to work together. And as a result, actually, we inspired a lot of joint action with a lot of other ethno-racial groups, the Italians, the Jewish, the Polish, the black community, all faces the same homophobia and acephobia in their media, right? And so we built that coalition, and for a few years, we actually did a lot of joint projects together, and it was really quite amazing. So I think the other thing that is really meaningful to me is really about when I came out, marriage is not a possibility. Having children is not a possibility for gay men, right? And living wasn't a possibility for Asians, for people with AIDS. But all of these realities, thankfully, are no longer true. So we now have equal marriage. We now have children. We now have families that are supportive, and we have people living healthily, happily with HIV, right? So, but I think though, for me who came out during the time when that was not a possibility, my families are my gay family, are my HIV family, and it's important for, at least for my generation, to have that connectedness to younger, newer communities, to see that succession. Because even though we have younger people in our own blood families, for me, family and community means all of you here. So it is meaningful, and it's really very, I'm very grateful to have that connection. And I hope that some of the work that we do will continue to advance. And I think it's really a privilege that through the work that we've done and seeing how all the great things that ACAS has done through the years, we've now moved to a much more strength-based approach to a lot of our programs, that we focus on the kind of resilience we can take pride in overcoming the adversities and oppression. And we are proactive in promoting the participation and leadership of people with HIV. And a most exciting example of that is what our next speaker is going to talk to you about. So, so one of the projects that I had the privilege to know a little bit about, but I'm not the best person to talk about, is the Asian PHA network that are being developed as we speak. So I wanted to invite Christian, Andrew, who else? Derek, Kevin, Kiwi? Yeah. You want to come up and talk about what's been happening?
Before we go on, we would love to actually thank you for the wonderful story, for telling us the history about ACAS. Okay, great.
Thank you very much. Yeah, because as the executive director, the present one, I would like to really thank Alan and people who started ACAS even before ACAS, because it's, for me, we're still part of the history, right? Like Alan said, we're still building it. And the core values and the principles that the founders of ACAS started or have them very solid, and we're really proud to, move it along, right? We're not saying, well, this is the group of people I don't know, so I'm going to start something new again. And I think it's a smooth transition because we have a very good foundation of our values and principles. And I would like to say thank you again for building that up, and we still have very good people who want to work in the community, right? And we welcome everybody to, if you want to, well, you're part of ACAS anyway, right? Like if you want to be more active, or you want to get involved more in different ways, please let us know. We're willing to hear that. And thank you.
Thank you.